Now, I know when you first hear the question, how did you get here, you think of here, this place, this auditorium, you think of who is the me, myself, my physical self, but I want you to think of it from a different perspective. How did you get here from this perspective of your identity, your self-image? How did you get to the point of where you are today? At first, when I asked how did you get here, you thought of transportation like trains, planes, automobiles, Uber, etc. But now that you know that I'm asking, how did you become the image, the identity of who you are, I think our transportation changes. And I think our transportation goes from trains, planes, and automobiles to communication. How did I get here? I got here through communication. And if communication is our transportation, then that is the transportation that's responsible for our transformation. So when we ask ourselves, how do we get here? What we essentially are asking ourselves is, what words have you received to get to the point, to believe the things that you got? So if your communication has been positive over time, I imagine you received words like, great job, hang in there, great job on that test, I hope you excel. Now imagine if that's your communication, which is your transportation, then you would have a positive transformation. But if your words of communication, which is your transportation, are words that are negative, correctional, like, why didn't you turn in the homework assignment? I thought I told you to pay that bill. You never do stuff on time. Well, if those are your words of communication, which is your transportation, then I imagine that you have a negative transformation. The reality is that language is important. Language is not only how we communicate. Language is not only responsible for our communication, but our transformation of ourselves, of our community, and of our world. Again, we ask ourselves, who am I? There's a wise quote that says, I think, therefore I am. But in the lieu that communication is our form of transportation, I think that it's I am because they think. Because the reality is, no matter at the end of the day, we are a collection of the thoughts that other people have had of us and that we've received for feedback. So I am because they say. All right, so at the end of the day, if you received a lot of positive things, then you believe you see yourself as a positive person, your self-image, because your communication has created this identity of yourself. You begin to believe you can achieve anything, but if the words that you've achieved have been negative communication over time, then you begin to have this thing called microcorrections. And microcorrections are subtle and everyday situations and corrections and feedback when people that have a negative impact on your life that's not intentional, but then has a negative impact on how you see your self-image. Here's a picture of my mom. This was the best day and the worst day of my entire life. I say it's the best day of my entire life because on this picture, she's hugging me and she's saying, I am so proud of you. Words that mattered to me, words that meant so much, words that got me to that point, words of affirmation. I say it's the worst moment of my life because it will be the last moment that I will receive such words of positivity and affirmation. And what I mean by that is I entered into adulthood. So the words that I began to receive is, why didn't you turn that bill in on time? When are you going to get married? I thought you were going to move out the house. And so what had started to happen was I had began to develop a negative self-image of myself, and I was asking myself, what is the biggest difference between when I was a young person to when I grew to the point of graduation? And the biggest difference is the language, the communication, the feedback that I was receiving. That is what changed over time. And so it went from being affirming and constructive to correcting and destructive. Joel Osteen says, watch what you say. You can give a person, you can say something to a person with 10 seconds and it stays with them for 10 years. I currently mentor about 20 young African-American boys in Orange Mound, where I'm responsible for their growth, their development, and how they see themselves. This is also a group of humanity that humanity has said that you are a problem, that you are this and you are that humanity has responded to these young men with correction. And so every single day when I'm speaking to my young men, I have their parents come up to me and they're always wondering, how did you change? How did you get Robert to go from studying to not studying? How did you get him to pay attention? The reality is that we did this. How do I connect? How did I connect with your son? And essentially what they are asking me is, how did you get my son to go from having an unfavorable behavior, an undesirable behavior, an outcome or performance to a desired outcome or performance? And what they were asking me, what they didn't realize is the answer was in the question. They were asking me, how did you connect with my young man? And that was the secret. And I think that's a secret to communication. It's connection. That's the part that we miss. Is she was asking, how do you connect with our young boys? I remember Robert. Robert is one of the young men that I mentor. He came by the house and he told me, I got suspended. Now Robert, when he said that, his first thing he expected for me to respond is, why did you get suspended? Why didn't you just pay attention in class? Why were you making the people laugh? But I knew in that moment that that's not what Robert needed in our communication. I knew that Robert needed to first feel my connection before I gave him correction. So when Robert came in, I hugged him. I gave him a nugget. And I said, you know why you make people laugh? You make people laugh because you have charisma. And at the end of the day, that is one of the greatest traits about you. But you have to decide when to use your charisma and when not to use your charisma. Robert went back to school the next day. And the very next day, Robert came home and he sent me this message. He said, look what I did, Sebastian. I said, this made my entire week, and the week isn't even over. I responded to Robert in the moment where I had the opportunity to correction. I made a connection. I made him feel loved. And from that, Robert then began to articulate and create a whole self-image that I can achieve myself. And this is what happened from Robert. Why aren't we more careful with our words? The truth of the matter is, normally I wouldn't have responded to Robert like that. A few years back, I probably would have said, why in the world didn't you pay attention in class? You just need to stay focused. You just need to do the right thing. And the fact is, most of the times, we are only concerned with the desired outcome at the time. We're not concerned with what's happening. We're only concerned with, do what as I say. Why don't we communicate more carefully? I recently did a study with about 50 of my friends. And within the study, I simply asked them, I wanted to know, if you had the context of a person's situation, would you respond to them differently than you normally would have? And so the first question that I asked in this context of the survey of the day that I did, I said, there's a friend coming in class and it says that she says, I'm nervous about this test. Now what you know about this friend is, one, that you know her mother always teases her about her smartness. 2, you know that her friends at school also tease her. 3, you know that the words that she receives about herself are always negative. So how do you respond? And the 3 questions I gave, do you say, did you not finish your reading last night? I thought you did. Do you say, if I was you, I would have studied? Or do you say, I've been watching you study for the test for quite some time now, and I'm proud of you. You've got this. Overwhelmingly, what I realized in that study, about 47 people came back and said that the answer was C. And I went on and asked, how do you think that made her feel? And an overwhelming response was, made her feel relaxed, calm. And so I went on to another scenario and I said, all right, you walk in and you see your boyfriend left on the toilet seat. You know he's been trying to do a lot better. He's been trying to respond to your text message. He's gotten to a point where not only does he washes the dishes, but he also cooks, and he is tired of letting you down so much. But he left the seat up. And what is your feedback that you give to him? Do you A, scream, Jason, come let the toilet bowl down? Do you B, say, you are getting better at some things, but you still need to fix this toilet bowl? Or do you C, let the toilet bowl down yourself, leave a note on it and say, oh, babe, you remembered. I love you so much. Overwhelmingly, out of the 50 people, 49 came back and said you should do C. And I asked those same people, how do you think he would have felt based on your response? And overwhelmingly, people said, he would have felt like this. He would have been inclined to go back and do more, to clean more. And so it made me ask myself, why do we respond the ways that we respond? And even I also asked, before you read that, before you gave the response that you gave, what was going to be your first response? And overwhelmingly, people said, I wouldn't have chosen the right answer. I would have naturally simply responded, did you not finish the reading last night? Or to Jason, come let the seatboard down. That's what they have. That's how they would have naturally responded. So my question is, why don't we naturally respond in ways that will impact a person's reaction? The reality is, it doesn't matter if your intent is honorable if your impact is not. And a lot of times in communication, we mean well. We say, well, just go and finish your homework, and we mean well. We say, well, baby, if you would have just done this, and we mean well. But when communication is the case, it doesn't matter how much your intent, only your impact. What happened to us? Why don't we naturally give to people? And the reality is, what happened to us is how, in the beginning, we asked, how do you get a person to go from the top and understanding that person and understanding their unfavorable behavior to understanding, to getting to the desired outcome? Why can't we get to that? What happened to us? And the reality is, there's no connection. There is no connection from the point of where it's the top, where we understand the person until we understand the undesirable behavior till we get to the desired outcome. There's no connection in that process. And so what ended up happening? What ends up happening is we will speak with good intentions, but when we speak, we're speaking only directly to the desired outcome. There are pieces that we're missing to this communication triangle because we're only speaking to the outcome, but what have we forgotten? What we have forgotten is the things that they may need to know the most in this communication. We only responded to the immediate thing. What do we see immediately? How do we feel immediately? But we don't understand the long-term implications of what we say can have on a person. Let's continue. All right, so we understand that the person wants to get to the desired outcome. But what happens between where we know the person, who they are, and the unfavorable outcome? What's in that process? What's happening there? And really what's happening is the unknown. This is an unknown part of communication where we have to ask ourselves, and we don't know, how hard has this person been working? What is their communication like? What is their input like? How much have they been corrected today? And these are all parts of the unknown that we don't know before we try to get a person to get to the desired outcome. Microcorrections. Let's review the definition. When a person receives everyday subtle corrections or feedback that may be received negatively and can be unintentional in nature, but can compound over time and cause serious injury to a person's identity and impact the person's ability to engage and perform and how they see themselves. We're talking about mobility. We're talking about how people engage and see themselves, and also we're talking about a person's mindset. Why is it that when you tell a person to do something in the correcting type of voice, you don't see the change? And worse, what is happening when we say these things? When we respond with positive feedback, affirmation, what type of mindset do we have? We see encouragement, we see engagement, we see confidence. The reality is that anytime we respond to this person and we communicate, they are internalizing it from two perspectives, either from an inferior and helplessness perspective or from a mastery perspective. And we make the dangerous assumption of assuming that everyone that we communicate with is coming from mastery. Everyone that we communicate with is coming from a place where they can actually say, based on the feedback that you give them, I can perform at a high level. But that could be not further from the case sometimes. And what happens when a person has this mindset and we give them feedback? Well, what happens is they become disengaged. They become hypersensitive. You ever told somebody something and they took it the wrong way, way too far, and you're like, whoa, where did all that come from? What's happening is the microcorrections over time are creating this mentality and how they internalize themselves and create their self-image. So we give them positive feedback, we see encouragement. But we give them negative feedback, and what do we see? We give them negative feedback, and we see helplessness. We see self-blame, frustration, sadness. That's how we see immediately in a situation. But if we aren't careful with the words we use, those words compound, and then we begin to hear something. You can tell a person, I just want you to do better in class. I just want you to start taking me out to dinner. I just want you to start paying attention. And a person can always hear, whenever you communicate, you are a failure. You will never amount to anything. You will never be engaged. Why even try? What's happening is the person is internalizing from their mindset from an inferior perspective, and we are not using the language that's most important to help them. Microcorrections over time. Over time, at the age of 10, a person has received a bunch of negative comments, and they believe, I don't really believe them, I can achieve. Because most people can achieve over what they feel. At the age of 15, they're constantly getting correction. You should do this, you should do that. What do they believe about themselves? I believe I can achieve despite what they say. At the age of 20, then at this point they say, I don't know what I want to do in life. I don't know what I'm good at. At the age of 25, he says, I'm good at nothing. I'm a failure. I might as well try. At the age of 30, they believe about themselves, I don't want to do anything or be around anybody or share any of my thoughts. At the end of the day, our communication is transportation that leads us to the transformation, and hopefully it's for the better. I want you to remember Robert. I also want you to remember that before using your new transportation, which is communication, there are about 5 things that you should remember. 1, you should remember to listen. Why do we listen when we communicate? How do we listen? We should listen with the intent to understand a person, where they are, how they feel, where they're coming from, what experiences have they had in life. 2, we should focus on the solution. So many times, I'll never forget when I went to work and I was about to put in my 2 weeks resolution, and the person asked me, are you ready to stop working? And I come in, I'm ready to put in my 2 weeks resolution, and the first thing that my boss says to me, he starts clapping. And he says, this is the most mature argument you've ever had since you've worked here. I've never been more confused walking into a work meeting. At that moment, I honestly thought that I was a failure, but he focused on the solutions, and from there, it increased my engagement. Another thing that we should think about when we use the communications transportation is that we should separate the behavior from the person. So many times we see somebody do something and we say, I don't like you, when we really mean, I don't like that you did that behavior. And so when we say, I don't like the person, we got to be able to detach our feelings about the immediate situation, understand that we're speaking towards a totality of an entire human being, and then we need to say what's necessary. Sometimes when we respond to people, we say way too much. Sometimes people don't need to know that you don't like the way that they breath smell, or you don't like the way that how they did their assignment. Sometimes people just need to know that you love them and that you're connected with them. So sometimes just say less. Then clarify the desired behavior. Sometimes when we're giving people feedback, we don't know. They don't know what to do. We just say. So sometimes all we have to do is clarify what it is that we want to achieve. And lastly, the appreciation of effort. At the end of the day, a person is giving their best effort at the time based on the knowledge that they have. So we should appreciate that instead of responding that with correction. Lastly, I want us to remember Robert. Robert is a genius. And Robert is a genius that in this moment, if I would have responded with correction, he would have been disengaged, he would have been out the process, and he wouldn't have had the momentum to achieve this straight A like he did. My question is, how did you get here? And now that we know that communication and transportation is a part of our transformation, not only how did you get here, but where are you going, and who will you take with you? Thank you.